call the Committee on Rules and Administration, Subcommittee on Ethical Conduct to order. On May 20th, 2010, the committee received a letter from a number of, 4 legislators, Republicans. It's a letter of inquiry regarding the ethical conduct of Senator Chaudhary. We received a letter which triggered a response from Senator Chaudhary asking to be heard in regards to this ethical conduct letter from the 4 Republicans. Senator Chaudhary must be noted as the person that is asking to be heard today, not in reaction to the inquiry from the Republicans.
Okay. Very good.
I think I'll start with Senate Council's been looking at this for over a week. It's a request from me to gather some facts as he sees those, and I will have Mr. Watson briefly go through some of the articles that he found that might he thinks deals with these issues. So, Senator, Mr. Watson.
Mr. Chairman, to review the letters then, does everybody has a copy of the letter from Senator Senjum and others, and the letter from Senator Chaudhary?
Should be in your
copies
pack.
been passed out so the members of the audience have those?
Senator Chaudhry's letter was dated May 27th, and the first letter was May 20th. So.
Then I have a handout here that's the rules of the Senate relating to ethical conduct, rules 55 to 58. You can pick up one of those. And then what the chairman was referring to, I think next, is this packet of newspaper clippings and statutes. And if those can get passed out so everybody has one, I'll walk through them for you. Should I take just a moment to highlight the rules of the Senate that are relevant here?
I believe that would be in order.
Maybe I should. On Rule 55, the Subcommittee on Ethical Conduct, notice line 23.18, Rule 55.2, the Subcommittee shall serve in an advisory capacity to a member or employee upon written request and shall issue recommendations to the member or employee. That's what we're about to do here today, is to issue some recommendations at the request of a member. Rule 55.3 has to do with complaints, and those complaints have to be submitted in writing under oath, but they also have to be received before adjournment sine die in the last year of a Senate term. This complaint did not, or this incident really arose toward the very end of the session, and nothing was said about it until after the Senate had adjourned sine die. So it's beyond the time when the Senate, as a body, can take any kind of disciplinary action, but it's not beyond the time when the subcommittee might give its advice to a member on request. Looking over to the standards of ethical conduct and Rule 56, note that Rule 56.2 has a standard about not publish or distributing written material the member knows or has reason to know that the material includes any statement that is false or clearly misleading concerning a public policy issue or concerning the members or another member's voting record or position on a public policy issue. So that's our standard for distributing written material. Rule 56.3 talks about improper conduct and says that it includes conduct that violates a rule or administrative policy of the Senate, that violates accepted norms of Senate behavior, that betrays the public trust, or that tends to bring the Senate into dishonor or disrepute. On conflicts of interest, which is, I think, the main matter of concern here today, we're talking about a decision that would substantially affect the member's financial interests or those of an associated business, unless the effect on the member is no greater than others in the member's business classification, profession, or occupation. And the requirement is that that potential conflict of interest be disclosed. I think that's about all that's relevant in the rules to this particular proceeding today. Then turning to the packet of newspaper articles and so forth, the first couple of pages are from the House Journal of May 12th, the 103rd day, and you'll see the highlighted piece is a motion by Senator Dill to add a Section 47, Special Regulations, Fish Lake Reservoir, St. Louis County. That's the amendment that is in controversy here. You'll see that it's one of several amendments that were being adopted on that day on the floor of the House. The next page, the next piece of paper, has the special regulations language boxed, but it's now Section 54 because other sections, I guess, were added in the bill before that, before it became the law. This is the text of the bill as it was presented to the governor. Next in that packet should be a copy of Section 10807 on conflicts of interest and the procedure for notifying the presiding officer of a conflict and asking to be excused from voting if one is a member of the legislature. Next is a copy of Section 97C.005, Special Management Waters. That's the law that gives the Commissioner of Natural Resources the authority to adopt special regulations for improving the fishing on a particular lake. You'll see that it doesn't require that a separate bill be passed to authorize the regulations, but this is something the Commissioner may do on its own motion.
Let's state that again, that it didn't have to be done legislatively. You could go to the Commissioner under rulemaking authority. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, just okay.
Then next, Mr. Chairman, is a packet of newspaper stories from the St. Paul and Minneapolis papers that recount what happened on that night of May 12th and following, and includes the explanation of Senator Chaudhary and some words from Representative Dill and others who were involved in this particular set of circumstances. What I've done, what you alluded to earlier, was tried to take that information that's in those several pieces of paper and condense it into a narrative that describes the facts of what went on. And it's in the form of a draft letter to Senator Chaudhary, dated today, most recently updated at 9:13 a.m.
Everybody have that?
Does everybody have that?
In fact, this is kind of what we're working off of. Okay. June 2nd, it'll on the top, and it deals with
It says draft.
It's important that we follow along on this one. You have that, Senator? Okay. Everybody have it? Okay.
And I think one of the main things that the subcommittee wants to do now is to get Senator Chaudhary's reaction to this. He has not seen this before, to see whether he might have edits or points of disagreement with it before the subcommittee settles on what the facts are. See whether there are any matters in dispute or not. We don't know that yet. So it just sets forth the fact that there was an amendment that became Section 54 of Article 1 of Senate File 2900, and that Senator Chaudhary was the chief author of the bill, and it had passed the Senate, and it was in the House of Representatives on May 12th when Senator Chaudhary went to Representative Dill and kneeled beside him at his desk. And
The bill passed the Senate without this in it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. This was not in the bill. And asked that he offer an amendment, and the text of the amendment is set forth. Then it says that he told Representative Dill the purpose of the amendment was to improve walleye fishing on Fish Lake Reservoir. He said lake residents overwhelmingly favored the amendment, and that at a meeting convened by the DNR in March to discuss a fishery on the lake, about 60% of the 30 persons present favored new harvest rules. He showed him an April 1 letter from St. Louis County Commissioner Dennis Fink claiming that residents wanted the regulations, but he did not show Representative Dill a later letter from Commissioner Fink that withdrew that assertion because he found it wasn't necessarily true. And he did not relay to Representative Dill a conversation he had had that day with Commissioner Fink where he discussed that change of position. It says Representative Dill understood that Senator Chaudhary owned a cabin on the reservoir. And in fact, the cabin was on land leased by Senator Chaudhary from Minnesota Power. So he didn't own the land, he was leasing it. He told Representative Dill that the amendment was being requested by Senator Bach, but that apparently was not true. Representative Dill agreed to offer the amendment, and it was adopted. The differences were reconciled in the conference committee that he and Representative Dill chaired. At the conference committee meeting, he informed the conference committee members that the amendment had been added in the House, but did not inform them that he had asked it to be added. He informed the members that he had a cabin on the lake. Then there's a discussion of the law of conflicts of interest, which says it's primarily a disclosure law, and is primarily concerned with financial conflicts, ones where the personal financial interests of the official will be affected by a decision the official makes. And it describes a conflict of interest situation where the public official in the discharge of official duties would be required to take an action or make a decision that would substantially affect the official's financial interests or those of an associated business, unless the effect on the official is no greater than on other members of the official's business classification, profession, or occupation. Then there's the rule of the Senate, which I read to you earlier. And then the standard from Rule 56.3 that says what improper conduct is. And that there is no further definition of improper conduct. That's left to be decided by the subcommittee on a case-by-case basis. So that's where we are at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator
Mr.
Shea.
Chairman, I have a question about whether or not when you lease this land, and I understand Senator Chaudhary has a cabin on it, I don't know if the cabin was there before or not, but can he sell that cabin to a third party? Or does it?
He doesn't own it, but who owns it? Minnesota Power, but he leases it, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a question for Senator Chaudhary, and this might be the point at which to put him under oath.
I think that's we're at the point where we're going to hear from the senator, and to read you the oath, Senator. Do you swear that the evidence you or shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do swear so.
Okay, Senator Chaudhary, we'll hear from you at this point.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the members coming together on this. It's been a hard couple of weeks with the media stories about this issue, but I think maybe to save the committee some time, I'll just kind of go through some of the questions that you have, and I think I agree with much of the draft that you have. There are a few factual things that are not correct that I'd like to talk about, but to answer Senator Scheid's question, the answer is yes. We can. It's the Minnesota Power lease arrangement is kind of unique to that area of the state, and yes, we buy and sell the cabin itself at a appraised rate by the market in that area, freely. So we bought it from a private person. But when one does purchase it from the private party, you do have to enter into an arrangement with Minnesota Power for the lease of the land on that. So I don't own the land. We own the cabin itself. We enjoy all the uses that a normal cabin owner would have, but there's a long-term lease, and so I don't pay property taxes on the actual land or the shoreline, only on the particular structure, which is 1,000 square foot structure, pretty modest.
That's
Yeah,
helpful, thank you.
that gives me a better understanding.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's an interesting construction in that of ownership in that area, and it is impossible to get a standard conforming loan to even purchase it. You have to make sure that you approach financial institutions in that area who know that this is the case, and there's no chance of it really, of the lease ever being canceled. It's like a 30-year lease, and so we pay lease. We basically pay rent on the parcel itself, and we're able to roll that into the mortgage for the actual
Senator Ingebrigtsen
structure.
on this issue.
Thank you. And Senator, so I understand you lease the property, you own the cabin. How long have you done that, and is it possible that the value of that cabin goes up or down depending upon the time, the recession that we're in? Is it something that if you hold on to or contract for 10, 15 years, does the value of it go up or potentially down?
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, it's subject to market rates just like any other place.
Okay, continue on.
Excuse me, how long have you owned it? I'm sorry.
We're coming up on our 4th summer. And I can tell you we're not interested in leaving, and nor are we interested in paying higher property taxes, by the way. The other items I would mention is on the first page, under facts, it says, I kneeled beside Representative Dill and whispered to him an urgent request that he offer an amendment to the bill. That is not the case. A lot of people saw me kneeling next to Representative Dill and thought that I was trying to pressure him into offering an amendment. That is not the case. I was kneeling next to him, telling him that his constituent and Commissioner Fink was actually at the chamber and asked him if he wanted to talk to him. And he told me no, and that is when I left the chamber and told him, Commissioner Fink, that Representative Dill was not available. He was presenting his bill, and Commissioner Fink asked if I could bring a copy of the letter he had sent me back in April down to Representative Dill, and that's what I brought to Representative Dill. I did not bring him an amendment. I brought him a letter from his constituent, who I did not actually know was going to be at the Capitol that day. I was just watching the House debate on the Game and Fish bill, and Commissioner Fink happened to be there. And I had not spoken with Commissioner Fink since his first letter and following phone call after that where we spoke about the issue, and I stated to him that that it was an important issue, that I could help make suggestions on what happened, on what could happen, but he needed to work with his local reps, and he needed to talk with the DNR. And I had not spoken with him since until he gave me a copy of the letter that he had written the same day as the House Game and Fish Bill was presented on the floor, May 12th.
Is that, Senator, the second letter from
Right.
Mr. Fink that withdrew? Or-
It was the second letter, but the letter did not withdraw any support for it. If you, I'm not sure where that interpretation is coming from. If you read the letter, it says, in my phone conversation with DNR staff, they state that they do not see a reason for moving forward with plans to implement slot limits. The community members I spoke with did not hear this latter message,
Senator Frederickson.
all believing the DNR would begin the planning process to move forward.
Senator Frederickson.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Chaudhary, when did you request that Representative Dill offer this amendment?
I asked Representative Dill if he was interested in this, and that is all I've done. There was at no point where I was urging him or asking him to do me a favor or do a courtesy to me to do this.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Chaudhary, when did you have that discussion with Representative Dill?
It was at the, it was an issue that I had raised to him, that there were people who were interested in this, and if he was interested in doing something on the House floor, or in his bill, he could do it, but it had to come from him because he's one of the reps from the area.
Mr. Chairman.
And when I did that was on the day of the I believe, and I'm trying to jog my memory on it. The last I can recall, best I can recall, was on the day that the House Game and Fish Bill was being presented on the floor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Chaudhary, who caused the amendment to be drafted? Was it you or was it Representative Dill?
Well, I can't draft a House amendment, so it would have to come from him, but I suggested that if he wanted to do something, it could read as such, something general, where it says there shall be some general language, boilerplate language that said that there will be some sort of fishing protection on the lake.
Mr. Chairman,
Frederickson.
Senator Chaudhary, without going back and looking at all the documents we have, I believe one of the letters was April 1st. Why didn't you bring this to the Senate committee, either draft a bill or have it as an amendment to the Omnibus Game and Fish Bill when it was before your committee, so the Senate members could have had time to ask questions of the Department of Natural Resources and give it due consideration?
Well, I think
Chaudhary.
in the end, that was something that I erred in not making sure that it was that the issue was vetted more, and that was my mistake. But after the April 1st letter, it wasn't a matter of me waiting in the wings to do a last-minute amendment. It was a letter that I got. I had a conversation with him that he needed to work with he needed to speak with the DNR, which his latter letter indicates he did, and he needed to speak with his local reps about it. And I hadn't heard anything from him about it until, I ran into him on May 12th.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm understanding, Senator, then, that it wasn't important enough for you on April 1st to bring this forward to a committee meeting. In fact, you've said that asked Mr. Fink or asked him to get hold of his representatives to bring it forward. Is that accurate?
Well, I think it was as important an issue as any other of the bodies of water that we were considering legislation for. It was no different than, in my consideration, than the Lake Florida provision that was also in the House Game and Fish Bill. But this was really something that was for Representative Dill to decide, and if he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't have. I fully state that I played an arm's length role in conveying the information on this, but to somehow say, first of all, say that I pressured it is not the case. And even if I did, we consult with other House members and other legislators all the time. That in and of itself I don't think is problematic. What I think was and could have been done better was that when I heard about this issue from locals, and they wanted something done, I should have nonetheless put on the brakes and say, let's have this in bill form and have a debate. But we've done this with other legislation as well. The previous provision in the bill on Lake Florida happened the same way. And I should also mention that we overrule the DNR in legislation all the time. That's a very common thing that we do, as was the case in this bill as well. So it wasn't an urgent request for me.
Your staff drafted the amendment and gave it to Dill, or some language came from you, of course.
The language came from me. My staff did not draft the.
Okay.
Yeah. I suggested to him that this could be done, but then it was the House that drafted it.
Okay.
So that part where I was urgently, kneeling at him, whispering him to offer an amendment is incorrect. I was telling him that his constituent had arrived. I didn't know Commissioner Fink was going to be there that day, but and I was working on 100 other things in the Game and Fish bill. This wasn't the priority of the bill for me. I would on page 2. And that the first full paragraph, it says, you told Representative Dill that the purpose of the amendment was to improve walleye fishing. I didn't tell him the purpose would be to improve walleye fishing on Fish Lake Reservoir. I told him that there were folks up in that area that wanted this. And that was for him to consider if he wanted to do something. Further down in the same paragraph, you did not show Representative Dill a later letter from Commissioner Fink that withdrew that assertion. There is no such letter that I've ever seen. The May 12th letter, a copy of which was handed to me by Commissioner Fink on the day of the House bill, said that basically says that he had talked with the DNR staff, and what they said didn't jive with what the community members thought they heard, and that the DNR was going to begin the planning process. There's nothing here that says that, oh no, I was wrong, the people don't really support this. There's nothing here that says this, nor have I seen anything or heard anything that indicates that. And I have not spoken with Commissioner Fink or heard from him or emailed or texted or anything since that day.
Senator Ingebrigtsen on this.
Point of clarity, Senator, that first large paragraph you're talking about with reference to that, who requested the DNR to come up and do the study to start with?
People had, this was part of the inquiry that I responded to from some locals. They asked me what the process was for implementing some sort of fishing protection, and I did ask the local DNR fisheries what the process is, and I didn't request them to study it, but they indicated that they were thinking about studying it, and that's something that they would do over the winter. It was just a modeling of data. And after that, they told me, after that, they sent me their findings, and before a public meeting, they explained to me that some sort of special reg was indeed appropriate for that. And all of this are questions from me. I'm not pressuring them at all. I'm just simply asking them, what is the process, what does it take, because, especially since they're interested in doing that.
Just to follow up then, Senator, thank you, Mr. Chair. You found it important enough to request that the people of interest here, the folks on the lake, get a hold of their representative to work with their local representative in getting an amendment or something passed. Did you request that the property owners on the lake that you reside, or that you have a cabin, that they go to their local representative or local senator to have them handle this and not you?
Yes, yes. That's that's precisely what I told Commissioner Fink.
Before the study was done, then, for the study, to have them request, have the House member request the study instead of you being the chair of the
No, and I did not call them as chair of the committee, and it was my right as a citizen to call and inquire, just as it is anyone else, and that's all I did. And a lot of people had asked me around the lake, what does it take? And I don't, I think we're confusing a little bit of the perspective in all of this, because I'm also a resident of the lake. I have friends and neighbors on that lake, and they know that I'm an elected official in this position. And so to simply, when some people ask me what the process is, if I were just simply to say, well, call someone else, call your rep, call the DNR, then I look like I'm not a very interested neighbor. And there's a human factor in there that is, I think we have to really understand. I didn't do anything that benefited me. And it's important that elected officials be responsive. And I see no problem with inquiring with government on people's behalf. I do that for people on Fish Lake. I do that for people on Leech Lake. I've done that for people on Cass Lake. I've done that for all sorts of bodies of water everywhere. I think that's an appropriate part of my role.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the four of us sitting here have the same responsibilities. It seems to me that if, and I live on Lake Ida, now if somebody were to bring an issue to me, right away I would have to say, wow, I sit on this committee. Not only do I live on the lake, but I sit on this committee. I'm going to have you contact Representative Westrom or Tory or Tremba, because you know what, it could be conceived that I'm going to benefit something. I could even be perceived that way, that I was going to benefit something. But you're telling me you didn't do that in this case. You didn't get a hold of, or have them get a hold of their local representative until it was time for the amendment.
It's not. It's honestly, Mr. Chair, Representative Ingebrigtsen. This was something that was amidst 100 other issues that I was working on. This was to try and portray this as somehow a focus of my work since I got that letter is simply not the case. It was a standard response in many ways, where I asked them to work with the DNR, find out what the information is, and work with the reps. And I will be happy to play a background role, which I disclosed, which I made sure to disclose, and people knew about.
Just to follow up. So just following that up then, so you did notify, or you did suggest that they notify their representatives before the study was done for this particular lake?
Not before the study was done. Up until that point, I simply made inquiries as to what the issue was and what the scope of the approach might or might not be. And I really didn't think about the issue at all until I got a letter and spoke with Commissioner Fink, who is a local elected official and who also resides on the lake. And even after that, the issue didn't really arise until over a month after that, when I got the follow-up letter that said the DNR is not, basically says that the DNR is not listening to the people. And that's not a stretch for me. I mean, we override the DNR a lot because they haven't been listening to the residents. And this is something that is for conservation, that doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit just the people who reside on the lake. It's a popular fishing destination that is a public water with 2 public accesses, 3 private accesses, and a lot of people fish on. There's no way that conservation can benefit one person, let alone in this situation.
Okay.
I told, a couple paragraphs down, I told Representative Dill that the amendment was being requested by Senator Bach. That is not the case at all. At no time did I say that. I did tell him that Bach is aware of this. He should consult with Bach, Senator Bach, on this. It's my understanding that Representative Dill did speak with Senator Bach and that Senator Bach didn't have a problem with it, but at no time did I say Senator Bach was requesting this amendment. At a conference committee, further down, just above number 2, you did not inform them that you had asked it to be added. Again, I did not ask it to be added. It was what we believe to be the folks up there who wanted this to happen that asked for it to be added. And nor did I hand him an amendment to pass on the House floor. I simply suggested language, and we collaborate all the time on various pieces of legislation. I'm not trying to say that I had nothing to do with this, but this is not something that benefits me.
Senator,
it's a conservation measure.
Senator, in the conference committee, was this amendment discussed at the conference committee? That you're aware of?
The only discussion we had about it when we met in the public conference committee was my disclosure that I did have a cabin on this, that on that lake, and that it's important for people to know that. That I asked the committee for advice on what their I did not feel it was conflict of interest because I'm aware of the law and it has nothing to do with financial benefit or benefit for me in particular regardless. But at the same time, I asked for people's advice. I want to know what you think. What is your advice on the matter? And that's exactly what I said.
Because it wasn't heard in the committee, so
correct.
We had to at least talk about it in the conference.
Absolutely. I thought that was important. The only other thing, well, number 2 is basically restating the law. The only other thing I would add is that in this draft is that that there were other regulations in the bill that the DNR objected to, but that we put in anyway because we felt conservation measures were appropriate. And I guess I would just conclude by saying that I feel that there was a conservation benefit to the state of Minnesota by this regulation and others that we did in the same bill that benefit everyone And it's something that we do all the time. But at the same time, because there was a tie to my knowledge of the lake, I made sure that it was disclosed. And at no time was I trying to dupe anyone. There was a lot of things going on, and we liked over the past 4 years, our committee and our legislature has made some really good change in favor of conservation. And we've done that a lot of times over and above the objection of the DNR, including going all the way back to walleye stocking itself, or the legacy amendment, or a lot of good things we've done for conservation. We work in concert with the DNR quite a bit, but sometimes we have to overrule them because, in the end, it's the people who run this democracy. And when there's an appropriate balance between conservation and what the people want, I think it's important for the legislature to act. And when it occurs, and that a legislator has a cabin on a lake that's being preserved or protected, I think it's important that that disclosure occur, even though there's no actual financial benefit. And that's exactly what I did. I wanted to make sure that I was being honest and open. And that's what we did here. And finally, I don't see it as any different from a teacher who helps with a school funding bill, or a doctor that works on a health care bill, or a business person in the legislature that works for tax cuts for businesses. We all benefit by the things that we do in the legislature. So I want folks to know that I was trying to be as open and honest as possible, make sure that this did come from the local representatives, and that anything that connected me to that was openly disclosed.
Senator Scheid.
Chairman, Senator Chaudhary, I think you probably should have had this vetted in your committee. Because the timeline, well, I have no idea when the idea to offer an amendment any place. I don't know if you had, may I ask a question? Did you have a bill drafted to do this? No.
No.
So, because the Commissioner Fink's first letter is April 1st, so there was plenty of time, I think, to talk about it in the committee. I think it would have been better to have vetted it there. I understand entirely what you're saying about things we do that where we may somehow benefit just as a citizen of the state. We vote on those kinds of things all the time. I understand that. But it seems there's a pretty fine line, or it might be even a little bit disingenuous to say that if you suggested the language to Representative Dill and/or House staff people who drew up the amendment, that seems to me that you did instigate this action. I mean, if you come forth and say, here's some language I think you might want on that particular subject, I think that's kind of a fine line. I'm troubled by that.
Mr. Chair and Senator Scheid, I agree with you. I'm not trying to say that I wasn't helping. I was. To me, that's not the point. The point is that I did my best. I was helping, but knowing that there was this connection, I did my best to make sure that I was at arm's length from the issue and disclosed it. And I received a letter after April 1st, which was after committee deadline, for one thing, but more importantly, there was no decision to create a law regarding this at that time where we knew about it and could have. It was only up until, it was at that time where I suggested to Commissioner Fink that he should work with the DNR. and consult with his local reps. There was no decision that, yes, we're going to have this law and we'll wait till the last second and it'll be fine. That's not the case at all. And it wasn't until May 12th that I learned that he had talked with the DNR and they weren't apparently listening to what people wanted. So I wanted to clarify that. But you are right, regardless of when it happened. Probably even more so, it should have been vetted, because I really have taken a lot of pride in vetting issues, particularly on hunting and fishing, because I know that they can be sensitive. Throughout my 4 years as chair, and I didn't in this case. It really should have been vetted more, and that was my mistake. And I've learned a very good lesson about that, and I think it's going to make me a better legislator.
Senator Frederickson.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Chaudhary, I